No, it's not. We were about the interview. You can't just. No, I mean, it's just like neighborhood. It wasn't a basement. It was a kid. Something down beyond your eyes. And you can be like, how to. We move. Yeah. Right?
Thank you all so much for coming and joining us this evening. This is Left Bank Books Presents Distinguished Professor in Residence at Loyola University Law School, Chicago, Maria Hawilo, in conversation with Professor of African and African American Studies at Washington University in St. Louis, Geoff Ward, discussing Dismantling Mass Incarceration, a Handbook for Change. Some notes before we begin. Today's event is possible because of your support. When you support Left Bank Books and the Left Bank Books Foundation, your money goes directly into the local economy, funding your streets, parks, city public libraries, and more. It also helps writers get the support they deserve and allows us to produce events such as this. So thank you all for shopping local, supporting this event, and supporting Left. We also want to extend our welcome to our virtual audience this evening. Thank you for joining us from afar. You will have a chance to submit questions for the Q&A. You can just put it in the comments under the video on YouTube. We at Left Bank Books have a fantastic calendar of events coming your way. On Monday, we host M.L. Rio here in the store for her new novella, Graveyard Shift. Very spooky. On Wednesday, Missouri School of Journalism Associate Professor Jared Schroeder shares his new book, The Structure of Ideas, Mapping a New Theory of Free Expression in the AI Era. Wednesday, October 16th, and I'm excited for this one, essayist Ross Gay will be at the Hawilo talking about his books, Book of More Delights and Inciting Joy, for both of their paperback releases. Now it's free. I mean, all of those are free, but I'm really excited about that one. All the details and a full calendar of our upcoming events can be found on our website. There is sure to be something for everyone. Okay, about tonight's title, Dismantling Mass Incarceration, a Handbook for Change. In recent years, a surging national conversation has called attention to the social and racial injustices that define America's criminal system. But despite growing movements for change, the vast machinery of the carceral state remains very much intact. How can its damage and depredations be undone? In this path-breaking reader, 3 of the nation's leading advocates, Primal Daria, James Foreman Jr., and Maria Hawilo, provide us with tools to move from despair and critique to hope and action. Dismantling Mass Incarceration surveys various approaches to confronting the carceral state, exploring bold but practical interventions involving police, prosecutors, public defenders, judges, prisons, and even life after prison. Rather than prescribing solutions, the book offers a forum for discussion and disagreements about how to best confront the harms of mass incarceration. The contributors range from noted figures such as Angela Y. Davis, Clint Smith, and Larry Krasner, to local organizers, advocates, scholars, lawyers, and judges, as well as people who have been incarcerated. The result is an invaluable guide for anyone who wishes to understand mass incarceration and hasten its end. About tonight's speakers. Maria Hawilo is a distinguished professor in residence at Loyola University Law School, Chicago. She has written for The Appeal, Injustice Watch, and other publications. Geoff Ward is professor of African and African American Studies and director of the WashU and Slavery Project at Washington University in St. Louis. He is the author of The Black Child Savers, Racial Democracy and Juvenile Justice, and numerous research articles and essays on race and justice. Would you all please help me in warmly welcoming Maria Hawilo and Geoff Ward.
Thank you for the introduction, and it's really a pleasure, Maria, to be invited by you to facilitate a conversation about this important book. I thought I'd maybe start by just laying out a little bit of how we're going to proceed. So we're going to have a conversation until about 6:40, and then have time for dialogue with the audience until about 7, and then Maria will be available to engage with you all until Left Bank closes, I think 8 o'clock, and there are also copies of the book available. So so I definitely I hope we can quickly get to a dialogue about this really important issue and the contribution you're making with this book. I thought maybe we should start by just not making any assumptions about what people know about mass incarceration or what is mass incarceration. Could you just, Maria, say a bit about how would you describe the problem of mass incarceration and why we need a handbook to dismantle it?
Well, thank you, and I definitely want to get to that, but I really want to thank Left Bank Books. I want to thank all of you guys for being here, and I particularly want to thank Geoff for being in conversation with me. If you haven't read his book, The Black Child Savers, I'm a big fan. I use it in my juvenile justice class. I think it is honestly one of the most important books on racial justice and juvenile justice that is out there. So please pick up a copy. Or order a copy. So mass incarceration is really a phenomenon that wasn't defined or wasn't even really said until about 2000, when a professor by the name of David Garland started using the term mass imprisonment to describe the growing rate of incarceration in the United States that went up 7-fold in a 50-year period. And then the term mass incarceration sort of took hold after that. Michelle Alexander calls it the new Jim Crow. Ta-Nehisi Coates calls it the Great Wastes. It is the surveilling, the jailing, the imprisoning of a large number of people in this country, overwhelming when compared to other like countries, and disproportionately, and this is when you look at what has happened and who we have jailed, Black men in particular, it is a disproportionate arresting, jailing, surveilling of young Black men. When I first became a public defender, that's sort of my introduction to this, one of the things you can't avoid when you work in the system is the racial aspect, the racialization of our prison system, of our jail system. And so Black men born in 2001 have a 1 in 5 chance of being incarcerated. This is a racial issue, but it is also an economic issue. If you look at housing restrictions and you look at job restrictions and you look at voting restrictions, that is all tied up in our system of incarceration. People often ask me, why should we care, right? Like, yes, I know why people who are incarcerated care, but why should we care? Employers should care because we're locking out millions, tens of millions of our fellow citizens from working in our jobs and in our corporations. Universities should care because it's really hard to go to school if the federal laws don't let you get loans and you've been in juvie. Our healthcare system suffers, and so it's sort of a system that is caught up in all these other systems, and that's, to place it into context, we're really the world's leader here in terms of rates of imprisonment.
I was reading the book, and and thank you for that context. I was reading the book, and most of my work on these issues has been more historically oriented, sort of how we got here, story. But one of the things I was thinking a lot about looking at this book, looking through it, was I wondered when you all decided to produce this book. Because I know it takes a long time from the conceptualization of a book to the book showing up at a bookstore like Left Bank and people, So I want to ask you to talk more about like when the book was conceived, and what I'm particularly interested in you reflecting on is how much has changed in the political and legal landscape between now and then. Because it was not long ago that we had elected officials talking about mass incarceration. We had a number of progressive prosecutors elected, and legislative leaders, federal and state, who promised to address mass incarceration. And we've seen in places like Missouri and St. Louis, even in the most recent round of elections, that many of those voices were removed from office, replaced by more moderate leaders. And you don't hear as much of the among political leaders today, the commitment to address these issues. So, could you talk a little bit about, like, how long this is in the making, and what you notice about this changing legal political landscape related to reception of the book and the moment it arrives?
Yeah, so the book for me first became an idea when I left. I was a clinical professor at Northwestern Law School. And I went to Loyola and I started teaching a course called Mass Incarceration. And this was my first sort of inkling of interest. That clinical courses, students were always interested in representing folks, direct representation. But in this seminar, I had people signing up. I was a new professor, I had people signing up, and they were really, these students were very interested in this connection between our prison system and this civil rights movement. And they pushed and challenged, and they kept saying to me, when I first started as a public defender, the question I was asked all the time was, how can you represent those people? How can you represent people, charged with murder, who may have even committed a murder? But what I started noticing, this is 2018, 2019, was people, and even before that, but there was a change, and mostly among the students. These students knew, they've now said to me, how could you have worked in a system that racist? How could you have worked in a system that broken? You were part of the system. And I really, when you're confronted with that, you sort of have to take a step back. And I was like, wait, I'm like one of the, and then I thought about it some more as we were doing this reading about the causes of mass incarceration, this huge reading. I thought, well, there's so many incredible books written about the causes of mass incarceration and the history, right, that goes way back, before 1970. And in fact, we were talking about abolition in 1970. Federal judges were talking about abolition. Professor Davis was talking about abolition. We were talking about it. So what happened? So I started to think, well, and my co-author started to think, well, we have all of this incredible knowledge about what got us here. But where can we go to figure out, and this is what the students, or when we gave talks, it was, how do we undo it? And yes, there was this national conversation before, the world's largest protests following the murder of George Floyd, that was beginning to happen, and people were organizing around it, and then it was propelled forward by that. and places, and we highlight some of the examples in this book, all around the country, started to figure out ways to change, to make it more humane, to make it better. So Geoff, I want to get to the political question. I think, change is not linear, ever when it comes to sort of a more just or more fair society. And so there will be, and I expect there to be retractions, but it is definitely different, even now than when I was a public defender. They were handing out sentences, like they were 15 years, 20 years, 15-year-old kids, 60, this is who I was representing. And we were just begging for 15 and 20-year sentences because otherwise they were facing 40 and 50 years. And that has changed. Like the kids, the rate of incarceration for juveniles has fallen by 80% or so in the last decade. The death penalty in the late 90s, early 2000s, we executed upwards of 300 people a year. This year we're at 20, 21. That's not, victory, but that is justice trending in a certain direction. And whenever you see sort of that kind of change, there are retractions. Right? Progressive prosecutors, which we talk about as one of the reforms in this book, have been voted out of office in some jurisdictions, but not in all. Laws decriminalizing certain drugs that were passed were then sort of changed to make them less progressive. So I think we'll expect to see ups and downs, but I still think the conversation has changed. And so
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's, one of the things I'm also reminded of in reading this book is when I first started thinking deeply about mass incarceration and working on it was around 2001. And I'd gotten to New York City to a postdoctoral fellowship at the Federal Institute of Justice. And I won't go through the whole thing, but I was intending to work on the Black Child Savers, and 9/11 happened. My whole life got upside down. But I fortunately met Manny Marable, the late Dr. Manny Marable at Columbia University, who had just gotten a grant from the Open Society Institute to address mass incarceration. And this was around 2001. I met him. I needed a faculty mentor as part of my fellowship program. And I was like, I could still, just an incredible figure in Black studies and someone I really wanted to inform my own work. So I reached out to him. I said, would you be willing to be my mentor for this fellowship period? And he said, oh, you know things about the criminal justice system. He said, I just got a grant from the Open Society Institute where I had applied for a reparations grant. And they told me, we can't fund reparations, but we can fund work on mass incarceration. In 2001. And my job with him was to organize what we call the Africana Criminal Justice Project, which focused mostly on, the idea was mobilizing around mass incarceration. We held a conference, and I think it was one of the earliest conferences that I'm aware of, Angela Davis and Bruce Wester. But what was striking to me, and one of the things that I was really struck by, is the question I want to get to here, and I think relates to your response previously about the conversation changing. I was really struck by the lawyers we met, who in New York at Fordham Law School and other places, who were in sort of desperately trying to catch up with the problem of mass incarceration, and particularly its collateral consequences, which, lawyers legal advocates were telling us, we're representing clients who are facing these penalties that we've not really been prepared to advocate for them. We've been, for example, we're used to encouraging plea agreements because of caseload pressures, because of draconian sentences that you might face. But we weren't sufficiently aware of how that might affect your ability to get a home loan or to maintain custody of your children, etc. So they were desperately trying to get ahead of this and sort of catch up to the way the law had really reshape the environment. And I think, and so I'm wondering, the question for me is about the audience for the book. Because I read it, and I think this would be a really powerful how-to for some groups of people, including people interested in going into law or who might just be studying law. But could you talk a bit about the different, I'm sure there are many audiences, but who are you intending for this book to really serve as a handbook in particular?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I first started thinking about it, and when we first started thinking about it, it was in response to particularly one of my, in response to the question of what can we do about it, which was a question if you participate in panel discussions or talks on this subject, and they're pretty, I've done a panel discussion with physicians and residents who were interested in that intersection between health and mass incarceration, or the intersection between policing and hospitals and their own patients' health. These were ordinary people who were like, we're not lawyers, but we care a lot about this issue. We do not want our patients arrested at the hospital. What can we do about it? Or by law students in the mass incarceration course, for undergraduate students who are like, we understand the causes, but what can we do about it? Can anything be done? And so the audience here, when I was thinking about this, was really the average person when faced with, whatever big issue. Here, for me, this is like the civil rights issue, a racial justice issue, an incarceration issue. How do you change it? So if you're a law student, not all law students will go on to become public defenders or prosecutors or judges, but they can certainly think about problem solving or changing or working towards justice in whatever arena. If you're a business student, you can think about the same things. So for me, the audience is sort of the ordinary person who's got a book club and wants to think through some of these issues that come up in the news. We can't escape it. It's ever present in everyday life, this particular issue. And so that's the audience that I think is sort of like, they're starting to think about it and wondering what they can do. And we're not all going to be lawyers or judges.
Hopefully. Well, one of the things I think related to that, it's amazing and really powerful about the book is the way you all have brought together not only a mix of sort of thematic and institutionally specific pieces, but a mix of forms of expression. And there's my friend Shiraz is an amazing poet. There's something in there that maybe I don't quite know what is formally a poem or not, but I think the piece on Don't Call It a Cage is deeply moving, and it's poetic, but it's powerful in a way that academic writing, for example, isn't. I love especially the interviews. I think they're so effective at making ideas that might otherwise be buried in inaccessible academic texts, really powerful and compelling, accessible and compelling. Could you talk about the intentions in bringing together these different forms?
Yeah, well, thank you for saying those kind words. The book is set up or structured to sort of cover the system or this non-system. To go from policing to prosecution to defense to judges to prisons to aftermath, prison after prison. And so taking the reader through what it really means to walk through we call it a criminal system as if there's one organized actor, and there isn't. And so when people focus solely on police, what they don't realize is we've got all these other actors who make charging decisions or who will decide sentences, and we can't focus on one particular one. And there are all these opportunities for intervention. So we have these 6 sections, and what we were focused on when selecting and debating and arguing over the readings, and there's a lot of material, right, on these topics, is readability. This was for a general audience, bookstores, And I hope, schools and universities can use it, but we wanted readability. We wanted people moved by the pieces selected and forward thinking. So we can sort of identify the problem, but we really wanted to focus on places, people, and ideas that could get us out of this mess. And they don't always, there is tension in the book, and we welcome it. This is not a book that prescribes one solution. It does the opposite of that. In a place like St. Louis, community might feel that the solution there is very different than a place like Newago County, Michigan. And we need to be open to all these different ideas. So those were sort of did it move us? Was it something you wanted to keep reading? I love that piece as well. We have tweets in here, we have articles, and yes, we have opinions, because we think we can all read opinions. So that was the idea there.
Yeah. So thinking about St. Louis, I mentioned I do mostly historical work, including work on the history and legacy of slavery and the history and legacy of lynching. And I should just point out, for context, that one of the social science research findings that's been replicated over and over again is that histories of slavery and lynching in a community predict higher rates today of things like homicide and rates of incarceration, higher rates today of punishment, corporal punishment in schools. This has been demonstrated through dozens of studies. So next time you hear someone say slavery ended a long time ago is not relevant, there's a vast literature showing very clearly that it is, and that these legacies include issues related directly and indirectly to mass incarceration. That's some context for just bringing up, the in St. Louis and in many other municipal cities and states right now, you have various kinds of reparations processes underway. And, I'm reading a piece like, Sharkey's interview on punishment, where he talks about the need to address punishment and abandonment together. Because we change the punishment policies, but we don't address the abandonment, the ability to sustain the benefits of a humane and otherwise just legal system is diminished. I mentioned before we started, I was just over in the College Hill neighborhood with my class today at Peace Park. This is an area of, I think, where there's 80% vacancy in this neighborhood. And, vacancy, and this is what Sharkey's talking about in this interview, is that addressing vacancy is not often thought of as a crime-fighting strategy, but it is clear from research evidence that if you want to create safer neighborhoods, it's a smart thing to do to invest in addressing vacancy. So I wonder if you would say, as we wrap up our conversation, if you have talked at all about or thought about like what you would say to, the mayor of St. Louis who's about to receive these recommendations for reparations, like where might these kinds of efforts invest with respect to addressing, and I don't only mean invest money, but invest energy, invest attention in terms of addressing the issue of mass incarceration?
Yeah, and that's a great question, and I think a good question to end this with. I don't have a particular answer, right, for the mayor of St. Louis, but a daughter of St. Louis is featured in this book, Erica Purnell, and Patrick Sharkey's piece, I think is just, it is so powerful because, for two reasons, that the piece itself is powerful, but also this notion that we don't really invest when we've been trying this mass incarceration experiment, this punitive experiment, for a long time. And it has failed us. It has failed to keep us safe. It has failed to keep us really safe, right? It has failed to educate our children. It has failed us to increase our health outcomes. So we keep failing at it. when we try these new ideas, like reparations, or like, voter enfranchisement, or like providing housing, or getting rid of all of these regulations, or these alternative, trained first responders, we've got to give it time, the same kind of time we've given the system of mass incarceration to build up, so decades, not a year or two before we pull back. And we've got to give it some money, the same kind of money that we're giving all of these other systems in the billions and billions of dollars. So I think, just to wrap it up, what I would say is the people on the ground really know what their community needs. And that's like, if I learn anything as a public defender, it's that you going in top down rarely works, right? It's the organizers, the community members, the people most impacted, both as victims, and often all my clients were victims, by the way, and as the accused. All of these people know what'll help get us out of this mess. And so what I would say to the mayor is listen to them.
So thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
And I want to now turn to dialogue, questions, comments. Should I go around with the microphone? Or?
I can do it for you.
Oh, okay. Any questions, comments? Who'd like to start?
Thank you so much. Just wanted to ask, since it wasn't mentioned, is concepts of dealing with probation and parole involved as well as the individual as a PO. There's massive shortcomings. Case loads that are unmanageable, boxes to be checked, numbers to be met, work units being more important than people. A variety of different aspects there. Is that being addressed in your book?
There was so much left unsaid, and it's almost at 500 pages, but that's one of sort of my heartbreaks. I would say it's addressed in that prison aftermath section a little bit, but honestly, probation and parole are its own. You almost need a whole other chapter. You're absolutely right. The hoops that folks on probation and parole have to jump through. I've had clients who said to me, I'm gonna do my time, I do not wanna be on probation because there are so many restrictions and I cannot meet them, I just cannot meet them. It's another, when I say surveillance and sort of the prison after prison, this is what I'm talking about. And I think when we think about the consequences, most people think they walk in, people serve their time, they're finished, but they're not. They've got years left where they are being carefully monitored, where every drug tested, curfew checks, their relationships with other people are being monitored. So those are the kinds of restrictions that I think about when I think about mass incarceration. It isn't just jail or prison. So that's a really important question.
I just wanted to add, not a question, but we just pulled this data. We just pulled this data for my work for Missouri. And it was staggering to me, even though I do parole work in Missouri, that currently 46% of prison admissions are parole revocations. So that's how big a percent of the problem with mass incarceration here in Missouri it is. And probably not a surprise to you if you're a PO, but 25% of those are returned on a technical violation, not a loss violation, meaning like they forgot to change their address with their PO or they missed an appointment or a call.
And there's some work being done around, giving greater discretion to the officer to bring that technical violation in the first place, or to not send people back to prison for technical violations, the drug rearrest or testing positive for drugs, but not enough. That's what I would say.
To continue on that, it's what you said, but it's also so subjective, despite state statutes.
Right.
That you can know that this judge
Mhm.
is not the person you want.
Yeah.
That revocation is more likely on a technical than this judge.
Right.
Or you can say the city of St. Louis, the assault second, the due to robbery first. But the exact same action.
Mhm.
It depends on the charges are gonna be a little bit different. City starts a little low and probably pleads from there, and the county will do different places, not the first source two. They're gonna start high and then they're gonna maybe work.
Mhm.
There's also assessments, like we call the Ohio Risk Assessment System.
Yeah.
I've been asking for stats related to the assessments, in particular, people of color, in particular, when they're being assessed by a person who's not a person of color. Because I see these assessments when I get them and someone was high, this person's high, not high risk, they barely put on their shoes themselves.
Mhm.
But because of their history, which you can never change,
Mhm.
you have all these additional points that just stay with you the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that there's oodles of research that says you kind of age out of crime, particularly violent crime.
Mhm.
So it just seems like there's so much money that's being wasted. And the denying of a parole release is getting the person off parole, you can't even leave their wheelchair. without assistance.
Oh, absolutely. And I think this, you raised another important point, and one that we do address. So the question of what can the ordinary person do, right? Judges is a good example, or prosecutors. I think in 46 or 47 states, we elect our prosecutors in this country. We elect most of our judges. They are not appointed. And particularly since when we're talking about criminal law, that happens at the state, county level, where we elect most of our judges. And one of, I think, the surprises to me over the last few years has been the organizing around, and there's been some retrenchment for sure, but around electing progressive judges. Word is out on progressive sheriffs, but the same idea, and progressive prosecutors, this notion that, look, if these folks are speaking in our name, because they are, that's what the criminal system is, right? They're speaking in our name in the community about public safety, then they should be pushing our values. And so what is their platform for probation, parole, technicalities? And you have some platforms for prosecutors who are like, Rasper is a good example. We don't want to go back into court and send these folks back to prison on these technical violations. So it takes, this is incremental. It doesn't happen overnight, but I think folks like you raising questions about assessments and how the history and how race and racism are really connected in the outcomes of those assessments really are sort of pushing us away from using this approach, right? Just lock them up.
One, I want to thank you for the work that you're doing.
Yes.
I'm an employee of Freedom Community Center, so I work for a restorative justice organization, restorative and transformative justice organization. And I've just seen some very egregious things where, because we work primarily with people who have done harm, people who have been victims of harm, and we bring them together over a year-long process to do a restorative practice in service to healing and accountability. Because believe it or not, a lot of people who have been harmed, what they do want is apology, and they want changed behavior. They want to be involved in the process. And I just wish as a society that we believe more that was possible, because I see it in my work every day that it is possible. And what I find really scary about probation and parole is that I saw a young man who did not have a violation at all. His pack on his ankle went dead, and he got a violation. Did everything that he was supposed to do as a condition. And I think a lot of people don't know that that unit costs $300 to $400 a month that the person has to pay for, and that they literally have to keep it on their leg as they plug themselves up to a wall for however long that unit needs to be plugged up to charge, right? So I think as a society, we're not informed enough about not only the hoops that you have to jump through when having a job, like you have to be employed, you have to have all these things, but you get a violation because your tracking monitor, which is tracked by a private company, there are private companies, this stuff is not ran through the prosecutor's office. These are private companies that are benefiting and profiting off of majority young Black people, because the rising number of people being incarcerated right now are Black women, right? The number of children who are now going into foster care because their mothers are now being incarcerated is something that I believe that we as a society need to become informed about, because those of us who work in restorative justice, those of us who work as parole officers, etc., and public defenders, we're seeing it firsthand, right? We're doing our best to intervene and to provide services. But what do you say to those children who now have questions about this system, about their father getting rolled back because he didn't plug himself up to a wall?
Thank you.
Professor, I have a question. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Does it? And how long is it exactly?
Dear friend.
And is this part of the solution?
I mean, we wouldn't have spent years on this. We wouldn't have spent years on this if we didn't think, one, that, you know, we had to start talking about solutions, and people had been, to be clear, and have been, and they've been doing the work. But we wanted to sort of collect it in a place where people could go, and we wanted to highlight and lift up the judges who were saying, I'm not gonna think about the collateral. I'm thinking about the collateral consequences. Educate yourselves. All of us need to be educated. I'm not going to send her to prison, because there is prison after prison, and that is punishment enough. And it is outrageous that we're doing that. I think this is part of the solution, the conversation, the education, the grappling with. And I think good people doing the hard work, and trying to change within and outside are really also part of the solutions here. But I do think that there is, I mean, I keep saying it, and sometimes my students, it's hard sometimes to believe it. We just had the execution of Mr. Williams, and that was a hard moment, right? If you're teaching and talking and thinking about this stuff, that felt like we were going backwards. So you have those instances, and then you sort of have to remind yourself this very notion.
Missouri.
But they
Well, not all of them.
no, but right.
Can I ask a question that just during,
Sorry, I turned it off.
oh, do I get back on?
Yes.
You know, so much of the conversation, well, first of all, I was thinking about, you know, this book, and we need a book on dismantling settler colonialism and dismantling slavery. And, you know, part of what I was thinking about with this book, with respect to that, is how, you know, a lot of moderate abolitionists, white abolitionists, were in favor of emancipation, but some of them were, many of them, I think, and really the prevailing view was what some of them called double emancipation, which involved freeing enslaved African Americans and then freeing whites from the presence of free blacks. So this is what led to the colonization societies, these efforts to banish free black populations. And that didn't work, but other things happened instead, like voter disenfranchisement, sharecropping, racial residential segregation, and ultimately, you know, people have written about it. There's written about sort of waves of the ways that has been sort of Brian Stevenson talks about, you know, slavery didn't end, it evolved. But here's the thing, I mean, part of what I think, I think about is some of these questions about, how, this really powerful, what you shared about this sort of mundane, but life altering matter of whether you plugged your leg in long enough, is, how do we create a compassionate community where more of us won't tolerate. And we saw this happening in that moment you talked about, right? In the Black Lives Matter. But here's the thing, that actually was a more specific thing that I was thinking about in this conversation. I wrote a piece about this years ago. One of the first things I published as a graduate student was called Punishing for a Living. And it was about, because I was starting to work on the justice workforce, and how mass incarceration had created this enormous group of workers working across all the fields that you've talked about and more, whose livelihoods are tied to this punishment complex. And you've added the private sector that's found ways to monetize. Part of what's really daunting to me about the idea of dismantling mass incarceration, besides the criminal legal policies and all those sorts of things, is what do we do? How do we, I mean, is it the green economy? Like, what is it that replaces the punishment economy? Because I do think a lot of people are, and I'm not, this is not judging of anyone in the room, my family members, police, my mother's a city attorney, career in Los Angeles, so this is widespread. But what do we do about the punishment economy? And if we are going to dismantle mass incarceration, where are people going to find prison towns? Where are people going to find meaning in their lives, security? It's a question. Another book, but
Yeah, and I think Ruth Gilmore, who is an abolitionist and really an expert on organizing around economic, around sort of, economic similarities to meet precisely your point, Jeff, and that is, look, prison guards do need jobs, and like the city attorney will need a job, and shutting down a prison doesn't necessarily mean, and we have a piece in here about shutting down a prison that I think is just a powerful piece. But what it means for the people who are part of there tends to be actually a community both within and around, right? Both an economic one, but also like other communities centered around this is work culture, this is the workplace. And that it's a massive economy. I looked at the numbers the other day. It's like 400 some billion spent of what we can capture on public safety yearly, but 2 trillion that we are really spending on all of the healthcare needs, et cetera. So it's a massive amount of money. For me, it's sort of like bite-sized, where are we experts? So if policy is the expertise, thinking through like fines and fees, and what are we doing about those? And some places have started to say, look, we can't have fines and fees associated with prisons, and we can't have cash bail. That's just contrary to what we think of as justice. So I think that's it's like pick your expertise or pick the area where you think you have the voice or whatever it is. That's sort of what we invite people to do. But you're right. I think we need books on dismantling slavery.
And Black women are also highly represented among the labor force, of punishment and industry, particularly prison, particularly the sort of service sector.
That's cross race. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's a really massive deal. Well, I think we've reached our allocated limit on time. I think I've used too much of it myself, but I want to thank the author. Let's thank Maria.
I just want to say really quick that we do have copies of the book at the desk, and our booksellers are willing and waiting to bring those out for you. And if you would like to order Geoff's book, we are prepared to take orders for those. They're just not here right now. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
And you, over here, sign.